Okay. Well, welcome everybody tonight. We are super excited to have Tom Young with us, who is running right now. And, what we're going to start off with here is let Tom tell everybody what he's doing and a little bit about himself and why he decided to run. Tom, take it away.
Hey, thanks for coming. I'm Tom Young. I'm a lifelong resident of the Salt Lake Valley. My wife, Allison, and I have called House District 40 home for 20 years and have chosen to raise our 4 daughters here. I think we're at a crossroads in the state. 20 years ago, we had 2.2 million people. Today, we have 3.4 million. We've become a global destination and the crossroads of the West. Our growth success has made us the envy of other states. And I think for many of us has made us introspective of what type of growth we want now and in 50 years from now. And that includes our quality of living. Professionally, I'm an economist who spent 15 years as staff member to the legislature. It's a little odd, running to become what was your former boss. In terms of issues that I think we need to address, inflation has to be a top concern. Prices in the state are running probably close to around 12%, and there are things we can do to address inflation. I think we need to address the growing wealth gap between the older generation and the younger generation. The generation Z and the millennials have about half as much wealth as their parents' generations. Concerned about zoning changes and local control and economic development, education funding, and crime. That's me. I bet some of you don't think this race is winning, but it totally is. Midvale, Murray, and Sandy, these 3 cities are the Pennsylvania of Utah. Especially my district, strong leaning both ways, but the district cares about the destructive power of inflation on workers struggling to make ends meet. We care about housing affordability and zoning changes that are being encouraged on the city.
So Tom, you mentioned inflation, and I think that's a pressing issue for everyone. I work in finance with local governments, and they feel it keenly right now. What do you think are things that the state could be doing to help combat inflation, and do you think that there are things that they can do to encourage good policies at the federal level as well?
Well, yeah. So, for instance, housing affordability is one issue that goes into the inflation calculation. At a time when the revenue surplus in the state is probably going to be 1.5 billion. And when you look forward to fiscal year 2024, we'll probably have 2.5 billion ongoing and then another billion one time to spend. We probably shouldn't be raising property taxes. It makes the situation worse. Gas prices are floating at $4 to $5 a gallon, much more than they were a year ago. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me to raise the gas tax come January 1st. That's what we're set to do, is raise the gas tax, which is the opposite of what I think we ought to be doing, is fighting against inflation, right? So we could postpone the gas tax increase. We could postpone property tax increases in times when we have large budget surpluses.
Okay.
At the federal level, right? The Federal Reserve's doing what it can. It probably should raise the federal funds target rate by at least 1% coming next week. My guess is the Federal Reserve will do 75 basis points. I think the federal government ought to be a little bit more cautious in its spending policy. Yeah, but at the end of the day, right, it's a supply and demand issue, and we probably do need to slow some of the demand because of the supply.
So that kind of leads into that housing question then, where housing inflation in Utah has been particularly thorny, and it seems like it's a supply driven metric where you've got an undersupply, and you've also got this demand driven side to it where you've got a lot of people just wanting to move to Utah. How do you kind of balance those two things, and what can you and the state legislature hopefully do to promote some good practices that can maybe alleviate some of that pressure?
Yeah, I often hear the argument that we've got a 40,000 home undersupply. I tend to think that the undersupply is probably closer to 500,000. And what I mean by that is that over 80% of renters would rather own a home than rent. And we're taking the opposite direction, right? We're starting out with projections of population growth that may mean that we need to build more apartments, right? I don't actually think that's the case. When you make population projections out to 2045 or 2065, you got to take them with a grain of salt. And we can actually take practical steps to slow population growth if we want to. So for instance, when we encourage more apartment building in places like Midvale, Sandy, and Murray, places that typically would rather not have higher rise apartments. We are encouraging individuals to come from out of state and set up shop in Utah, which is fine. I like economic growth just as much as the next guy. And in the coming 3 generations, we're going to need that economic growth. Right now, we're trying to, slow it a little bit. But anyway, going back to the zoning issue, right? We're building more apartments. It's bringing more individuals into Utah. And that effect is driving up not only single family homes, but also apartments. So I'd prefer that we slow down the growth in apartments. I actually think that would have a better downward pressure effect on housing prices than what we're doing now. Because it's counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, it seems pretty counterintuitive and against a lot of, I think there are a lot of other economists who would probably say that that's not what you find in the past. So what makes you think that?
Oh yeah, because if you start out that population growth is going to happen regardless of what you do, then obviously you have to build places for individuals to live, right? But if you start out from the view that we can take practical steps from a policy perspective to address population growth, to slow population growth, then the idea that population growth is going to happen regardless becomes sort of moot. We can influence how many individuals are coming into Utah. And just on that point, let me just say I love growth. Economic growth, great, right? But right now we have a growth. I hear over and over we have a growth issue, right? Many of my constituents would love to slow growth a little bit, but looking forward, we have 50,000 births, 20,000 deaths happening right now, 20,000 individuals coming into Utah, right? So the growth is an issue right now, and we need to do things to address it. But long term, if you start looking 2 or 3 generations, 4 generations, we're not going to be complaining about growth. We're going to be begging for it. And the reason being is that 2.1 birth rate is replacement level. Our birth rate is not going to reach replacement level. So, if growth from out of state slows down, we will eventually turn that curve to where we're gonna want more births.
Yeah.
And more growth, right? More growth.
Well, so let's kind of change gears here and maybe get out of the weeds and go back into just kind of some more general things about, what do you think is the best way to fight for the issues you find important while, still maintaining a civility in the political realm? So I think that's something that's lacking. We want people who can fight for important issues while also, being agreeable. So how do you balance those two things?
Oh, you find who the New York Yankees fans are, and you defriend them, and then everyone else is your friend.
Okay. So no New York Yankees fan. So you're not asking the Yankees to relocate to the new prison site once we build a Major League Baseball stadium, huh?
Yeah, just my background. I come from a background that my parents would hold a town hall meeting for, I'm not going to say who it is, but they would hold a town hall meeting for a Democratic representative, while at the same time having a sign in the front lawn for "Vote Me a Love."
Yeah.
And I come from that sort of background to where, it's okay to be friends with all parties. And, there are points made on both sides of the aisle that are valid and worth talking about. Obviously, I'm going to take steps that are consistent with, a conservative, moderate value, meaning we need to be careful with our spending and work on tax policy that's beneficial for the taxpayer. I care about, anyway, I don't want to ramble, right?
No, you're fine. I appreciate it. I mean, we want to hear what you have to say. So I guess what makes you care about state level politics, and why get involved now in state level politics versus, any other time?
Oh, why now? Why not in 20 years from now when I'm retired and, thinking about a trip to Germany for 3 months? I think it'd be fun right now to, go to the St. Peter's pilgrimage, the Camino in northern France and Spain, go 3 months and walk across Europe. Now's not the time to do it.
Maybe stick to Western Europe. Keep away from Eastern Europe right now. It seems a little volatile.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm getting in is I'm concerned about where we're heading, and I think we can take practical steps to improve our long-term outlook.
Okay. Well, so what are some things that the legislature has handled recently? You're an economist, so maybe you could talk a little bit about sales tax on food. That's a really hot button issue, and kind of walk us through how you would approach thinking about that and as a legislator.
Oh yeah, So for example, on the sales tax on food, it's around 200 million to get rid of the state portion. The state portion is a 1.75% tax rate. It's another small step to lower the inflation pressure on consumers. The state has the money right now, right? The state is loaded with money. If we want to take steps to help out taxpayers, now's a good time to do it. I'd be in favor of doing it. The sales tax is felt by almost everyone. The sales tax on food is felt by almost everyone. It's another practical step that we could take. Yeah.
So, it's a really difficult issue because at the state level, the state has these pressures from their revenue sources. Income tax is a growing revenue source, but it's constrained constitutionally to the education services, and then sales taxes are there to fund the rest of the general fund. And I'm just kind of wondering, what you would think would be a way to kind of manage that going forward, or if that's kind of a tough issue that may just require a lot of going back and forth with other people and finding something over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's a difficult issue, and it doesn't seem like the public supports getting rid of the income tax earmark. It depends on what you want to spend the money on. The income tax revenue, corporate income tax revenue, has performed astonishingly well over the past few fiscal years, much better than expected. And early indications are real positive. Do we want to spend that money on education and services for children and individuals with disability, or would we rather spend that money on other priorities? I'd prefer to do a little bit more for the taxpayer, not only because right now, the more money we spend as a state, the greater problem we're adding to the inflation pressure, right? Whereas long term, we need to right. If we spend the money now, we're creating demand, and that puts greater pressure on inflation. Right now, we don't need to be generating. We don't need to be concerned about growth in the state. Long term, we do. So a lower income tax rate does exactly that. It does not encourage inflation now, but encourages growth over the coming generations.
Yeah. Well, so
what were you getting at with the constitutional earmark?
Just nothing. Just I think it's a real pressure issue where income taxes are becoming a larger portion of the state's budget, especially as we move, sales taxes move more towards services as the economy becomes more service-based rather than goods-based. And you see this decline in the percentage of the budget that is able to fund the general needs of the state. And, it goes a bigger portion of the budget is then earmarked because of that constitutional earmark on income taxes towards education. And, education is such an important and priority that, having that earmark is important, but balancing kind of the need for more revenue as you see declining sales taxes as a percent of the state budget, that's a tricky issue that I think a lot of the legislature is looking at. And just, I know residents.
Just on that issue, so most of the shift from goods to services has already happened. And, some think that we're going to continue on that path until no goods are taxed and everything services. That's not actually going to be the case.
Right.
And I think in the future, we're going to flip the other way as manufacturing starts to come back to the US. And I think we should encourage manufacturing activity in the state and across the country. There really isn't a lot of services out there that are easy to tax, right? So I discourage us from going down that path. We tried it. There wasn't a lot of appetite for it. And I think we're looking at the wrong trend line. It's going to flip the other way. And to me, I'd rather spend the money on education anyway. Right. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, education was more diversified. Individuals could go to different providers. Learning was not only in, 17th century type classrooms, but it was also out in the field or in a blacksmith shop. We entered the Industrial Revolution, and education has become more like manufacturing, right? So you show up at 7:30, you go to class for 45 minutes, you take a 5-minute break, go to another class for 45 minutes. You do that from K through 12th, and then you graduate and you're done with learning, right? You're done for good. Unless you decide to go to college, and then you show up for class, sit there for an hour, and then go home, learn something for 3 hours. If you're me, I just go eat pizza for 3 hours and play Xbox, and then, study at midnight. We've already started a new age of education where we're moving away from industrial model more towards a model that's focused on meeting the demand of students, right? So education can be done in a number of different ways, right? Not just, you can get a 1 to infinity type of relationship between the professor and students, where they're infinity students when you're using a service like Khan Academies, right? Some education's still done in the classroom, but education's also done on the dance floor and on the basketball court, on the football field, in the auditorium. So I think in the future, we need to move towards an education system that considers student demand. That may mean, more private providers. State and local government does a good job, but it tends to be more slow moving, harder to change. And I think the education system in the future will be more nimble. And the state, it looks to me right now like the state will have to fund it, which, and fund it well, because we need to be able to compete with the most competitive global labor market the world's ever seen. What I mean by that is, freelancing activity has exploded and companies are moving towards more of a on-demand work model. Anyway.
No, you're right, and I think that's kind of a great transition into. I know you currently serve on the or at least you were at one point on the board of the American Preparatory Academy. Is that right?
Yeah, I still serve on the board of American Preparatory Academy, and I serve on the board of the nonpartisan Utah Foundation.
Okay, and what made you kind of get involved with APA and the work that they do? Just it seems like that's more about your view on school choice and kind of changing up the model for school in general. It sounds like.
Oh yeah, I respect all types of education, and I'd prefer parents have the option to send their kids to charter school as well as traditional schools. Right. I'm concerned about where we're going, and that's why I joined the board. I think the school is well run. It's one of the most successful charter schools in the country. Does a good job.
That's great. Yeah. Well, Tom, is there any other kind of things that you want to tell us why you know kind of make one last pitch for Tom Young and what we can tell people and you know what sets you apart from your opponent that you're facing?
Oh yeah, what sets me apart? I'd prefer not to get involved in the culture wars. I think we need to focus on things that affect us at the table, right? We need to address inflation. We need to address affordable housing, education funding. We need to look at our future and talk about things where we can meet at the middle.
Yeah.
And just a pitch for me, right? This is the Pennsylvania district of Utah, right? If you want Utah to move more towards good policy, you want Utah already has good policy. That's not what I mean. We got great legislators, but if you want Midvale, Sandy, and Murray to have more of a say in the process, then vote Tom Young. I need you out there.
So Tom, what can people do to help you?
Oh yeah, if you want to go door to door with me, I'd love for you to come with me. If you can hold a town hall, I still have a few signs to put up. If you'd like a yard sign, or if you want to give me money. But more importantly, you know, I just like to meet you and see what I can do for you.
Well, Tom, I think that you know you're absolutely right that Midvale, Murray, Sandy area, it's the center of Salt Lake. Salt Lake, in some ways, you know, maybe we'll call it the eastern center of Salt Lake, considering where it is. But it's a really crucial part of the county, has been for years, and especially as everything's just grown together, that's a real focal point. So I think it is very important. Appreciate you running for the position. It's hard to take on an incumbent, but we're glad to see you doing that, and I wish you well, and we'll do our best to help you out in the process, because it can be tough. So,
I appreciate it. Be on the lookout for emails and texts from me about town halls and ways you can help.
okay, Tom, really appreciate you joining. We're gonna transition here in the next couple of seconds, if that works for you. We're gonna transition to Representative Candice Pierucci. Hi, Candice, how you doing?
Good. I'm in a classroom. I just finished up teaching my class, so forgive the background.
Teaching a class. Tell us, what are you teaching?
I'm teaching American government, American national government down at UVU.
Oh, very nice. You convinced DeSart to let you teach that, huh?
You reached out about it. I'm pretty excited. I am an alma mater of UVU.
I am as well. So you may not remember, but we crossed paths at
I
UVU.
remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you know, it's that's really great. How's that going?
It's been awesome.
The first
I really
semester
love
been?
it. Yeah, it's I've taught an online course before, and I gotta be honest, I hate online courses. I really do. So it's been really fun to be in the classroom with students and dive into the materials, and it's been awesome.
Well, that's awesome. You know, I think some of our four-year universities and just the Utah system of higher education in general does a great job of spitting out some students, and glad to see some state legislators involved in teaching. You should be teaching state and local government. That's
I know
that's
my next pitch is we need a state and local government course again. So
yeah. Do they not have that anymore?
I'll have to see. I know that wasn't it Luke Peterson who used to teach that?
Yeah, and Luke's not at UVU anymore.
Yeah,
so
I'll have to. I'm sure they found someone to teach it. I just haven't seen it. Yeah.
Well, Candice, we'll let you kind of take over for a second and just tell everybody about yourself and how, you know, how long you've been in the legislature and everything.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I represent what will be House District 49. It's currently 52. So my current boundaries include Riverton, Harriman, and South Jordan. After redistricting, I had to shed about 39,000 voters. I had a Senate-sized district, which just shows the explosive growth we've experienced out in the southwest corner of the valley. My family and I live in Riverton. I grew up in Harriman. We're in that part that everyone calls Riverman, but love our community. The new district will include a good chunk of Harriman and that peninsula of Riverton, but I love this community. And I won the special election in 2019 when John Notwell resigned. And so I have been in office since then. I serve as vice chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. I'm also on the Government Operations Committee, Transportation Interim, which is really critical for our area as I continue to fight for transportation projects that are so desperately needed. And then I'm also on a couple other sub work groups and different committees. But that's it in a nutshell on what the structure of my service looks like.
That's awesome. You know, it sounds like a lot of great work. I think you were at one point the youngest member of the legislature, but you aren't anymore, right?
I still am, actually.
Okay, you still are. Well, what's that like? What's it like being the youngest member of the state legislature?
You know, it's great. So I got elected at 27. I'm the youngest woman ever elected, and I am the youngest member. I just turned 30 this year, so I'm feeling a little old. We do have a couple new members coming in who are 31. We're definitely expanding our pool of millennial Republicans, which is fantastic to see. Honestly, I feel like I'm really able to represent my area. It's the average age is 26, and a lot of young families who are just trying to balance their budgets and raise their children, right? And so anyways, it's been a great experience so far, and I feel like everyone brings their different perspectives and experiences to the table, and being a young mom is definitely a benefit.
Yeah, and you have one son?
Yep, I've got a
That's right.
3-year-old. Yeah.
A 3-year-old. So I mean that gives you a really unique perspective as a young mom, and you know, you talked about people's budgets and how difficult that is, and especially right now with rising inflation, and what are your kind of, you know, ideas and thoughts on how to help people you know, put more money back in their pockets and navigate the inflationary times we live in?
Absolutely. So there's a piece of this puzzle that I can do very little about as a member of the state legislature. When our federal government continued to suspend, they celebrated the Inflation Reduction Act. Well, inflation went up again this month, right? So there are things that we can do to try and pressure and influence the national government, but we're not able to impact their fiscal policies and their bad choices. But we are able to do things at the state level. And here's what I'm advocating for. And I've opened a bill file on this and I've been working on it. I think with right now, it's going to be more, but projected 1.4 billion one-time money surplus. That's a ton of cash that the state has that we should be giving people a one-time tax rebate back. You should be getting a portion of your hard-earned money back the state took, over collected, in my opinion, that you can put towards providing for your family. I also think it's time for Utah to do another income tax cut. Again, we should be giving as much of people's money back to them rather than taking it and keeping it for government programs. So I'll be lobbying for that. Obviously, we're looking at ways to address the property tax issues we're seeing with the recent issue with Jordan School District and the group who tried to start a referendum on that, finding they're not included in Utah code. That may be something we consider, that's an option as a tool for constituents and citizens of Utah, that they would be able to do that at this district level when they're increasing taxes. You know, we're also talking about how do we reduce levies? How do we get at these special districts that are increasing it? I know my area, the taxes have gone up exponentially, right? Our property values have gone up. So that's something we're working on. There are several legislators who we're working on that with. We're looking at how do we get it to a place where Utah's housing isn't so unaffordable that my generation and the generation right below us, the Gen Zers, are moving out, going to other states so that they can actually buy a home in a realistic amount of time. You know, I think that one of the strengths I bring to a table, honestly, as a candidate, is I'm balancing a budget month to month. We just had to replace our AC, which was a major hit to us. So when you talk to a family, like when their AC goes out in summer, it's like, oh my gosh, all your financial plans for the next, who knows, 6 months to a year just got totally axed, right? Because you have to reevaluate and you have to reshift. And I really do think we need to take those principles of how you manage a home budget to the state level. And while people are tightening their budgets, I myself, and I've seen other people putting things back when they're checking out. We need to do that as a state legislature. We need to be putting things back on the shelf that aren't a necessity, that aren't a huge priority for us right now, and giving people their money back. So anyways, that's something I'm working on to try and alleviate some of the financial pressures people are feeling and get their hard-earned money back in their pockets.
Yeah. My daughter was born 2 years ago. We were at the hospital and I checked my Nest app because we were going home that night, and it was 102 degrees outside, and inside our house it was 85 degrees. Air conditioner broke. So
worst timing ever.
right as you're having a brand new baby. So it's hard. People have to deal with things, and especially now housing's become such a large portion. I mean, it's always been a large portion of people's budgets, but if we can't get a grip of that, it makes it more and more difficult. And especially out in Harriman, Riverton area, that's where the growth is happening, where housing is, people are moving out there. And I think, maybe 20 years ago, people thought, well, that's way out there.
Yeah.
But now it's like you said, the population center of the county is shifting towards you every year.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're going to see unique water challenges with that. We're going to see transportation challenges. We already are seeing that. That one of the things that I pushed really hard for was getting 134th funded for the interchange, so we can actually have Bangor be a full highway for people. So there are things that obviously we're going to need, and quite frankly needed years ago, but we're really playing catch up because of the growth we've seen.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I think it's really important to have, this diversity of perspective where you have a young millennial mom in the legislature who can provide a perspective that, is valuable and sees all these things that are happening, especially in that part of the county where I think there are a lot of millennial young moms out there. So
Yep.
I want to kind of switch to something that, I think kind of piggybacks off of that and talks about, raising a family here in Utah. And you've kind of been an advocate for school choice here in the state. And so I'd love, for you to kind of tell everybody about why you have taken that on as a key issue.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So school choice to me is critical in giving parents more resources in their tool belt to individualize their child's educational experience to what they need best. And last year, I worked on legislation related to this, and I have been working diligently during interim to try and meet with stakeholders and get this to a place where it is much more refined and ready to go. But I will say the key things that we can take away from COVID is that a one size system does not fit everyone, right? And that we found a lot of parents who, when kids were coming home, they realized either A, they liked having more options with having their kids home. So we had a lot of micro schools starting up. A lot of parents were frustrated that they didn't have a lot of alternative resources to the traditional, district or charter school their kid was going to. We saw a huge increase in homeschooling in general, and that's tied with microschooling, but parents wanting to be able to tailor curriculum to their kids' needs. And I think it really accelerated people wanting more options. And a lot of people will push back and say, well, we have charter schools in Utah. Charter schools are great. They're a part of the public education system. They have a different governance structure, but they're still considered a public school, right? And people are paying into a system that they may actually not be reaping the rewards of that. So for a family who homeschools, they're paying their property taxes are going into a system that they never are able to access. So the legislation I've been working on would empower parents to be able to access their tax dollars, to be able to direct them directly to the needs of their kids and give them more opportunities. So if your child would do better and thrive more in a micro school environment, you'd be able to use those resources to go to that. If your child would thrive better in an art private school, you can use part of that amount to go towards it. So there are lots of different options that are available through school choice. And I think at the end of the day, we need to get to a place where we are funding students over systems. And so much of our funding structure is built to protect the system rather than focus on students. And that's what I'm trying to get the conversation back on, is students and giving parents better tools to get their kids educated.
Well, I guess, that leads me to a question that I always have in this conversation. So I work with the State Charter School Finance Authority, actually, in my day job. And so I see a lot of charter schools, and obviously this is a broader question you're talking about, not just charter schools, but it becomes difficult on homeschool issues and to kind of make sure that, and how much do we need to make sure, I guess, that those funds are being put to actually educating the students, and how do you kind of balance those twin needs or those twin desires to put parents and students at the forefront of education while also making sure that the education quality is there.
You bet. So, you're asking about transparency and accountability in this, and where is it in that process? So the way the bill is structured last year, again, we're working, the bill is evolving, but the concept is this, and it would stay the same to ensure that it was being directed to educational purposes, similar to an HSA, which most people have, where you have a pre-approved list of expenses that you can direct that to. It would be similar to that. So there'd be a pre-approved list of educational expenses that would be more common amongst the pool of students who are using these funds. And then if something was outside of that, but still fell within, an educational resource listed within the bill, you would purchase it and then submit a receipt. So it's not just going to be us handing parents a blank check. They're going to be directing those funds similar to how you direct an HSA. And we found a lot of success in Arizona in students' academic growth, as they have had choice in their education system for over a decade right now, and that they have found that parents are great judges of how their students thriving, but the data they've been able to collect and aggregate data on kids' experience has shown that they have grown quite a bit academically.
Yeah, and I think that was more kind of where my question was geared toward. The transparency is really, really important too to me, but I think the maintaining quality of education is so valuable and so important to just a generally functioning society.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that aspect. I appreciate that answer there.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, so I've got to ask you about some upcoming legislation you're dealing with China.
Yes.
I have no idea what this is, Candice, so tell me what it is.
All right. So during actually my first session, 2020, and then last session, 2021, I was working on getting our Confucius Institutes closed in Utah. So Utah was one of the few states we still had Confucius Institutes closed. They're a language learning center that is funded by the Chinese Communist Party. And we had one at SUU and the U. And so it took me 2 sessions, but I was able to get those closed and prohibit additional centers like that popping up. Now, we also made a huge investment in a language learning center down at SUU, the Helen Foster Snow Center, because it is critical that our kids have these needs met and these language skills, but we should be funding it ourselves, not the Chinese Communist Party. And as part of the issue with that, they would teachers would sanitize Chinese history, so they wouldn't be able to talk about Tiananmen Square or give you a clear-eyed view of China. In extreme cases that we found in other universities across the country, the teachers would be required to report back students who participated in pro-democracy events on campus, and then they would go home and be in trouble. So there were a lot of issues with it. The State Department, the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, the FBI had all made recommendations. They were meeting with the U especially as a research center. So that was my first thing I really worked on related to China. And since they're just, cracking that little corner, I've been able to find a few other issues that I think would be really helpful for Utah and safeguarding the interests of our citizens. So we have a Confucius classroom actually in one of our school districts. Most school districts have the dual language immersion program, which is, a lot of people are familiar with dual language immersion. It's a great program, but there's a school district who is operating in a Confucius classroom and receives funding from the Chinese Communist Party. So we'll be working to close that down and get our dual language learning funding up to a place where districts aren't going to China, for example, for additional funding, which with money, there is always strings attached, right? That we're taking from this government. So that's one of the areas. Another thing I'll be working on in a bill I've got going is limiting China's ability and prohibiting them from purchasing rare minerals and land in Utah. It's becoming an issue. And nationally, we're seeing that. I have a colleague who's going to be looking at protections and privacy for our tech companies here. Obviously, we have a growing tech sector. So there are a lot of things I'll be working on. I have a resolution that will be a follow-up to similar legislation run by Representative Brammer that's condemning the Uyghur genocide and alerting Utah companies to be aware of products that may have been manufactured by slave labor and, making those decisions. And then also looking at disclosures for trips that legislators take. So right now, if a lobbyist or anyone, but gives me a gift over, it's $29 for a book. I can't take a book that's more than $29 from a lobbyist, right? You have to report those gifts, and we don't have reporting requirements necessarily in play if a government comes to you and says, hey, we'd like to pay for a trip for you to visit Taiwan, fully covered expenses. And I think we shouldn't, I'm not prohibiting those in this legislation, but I think it would be important for us to be transparent and disclose when a government pays for our expenses with the assumption that we're representing Utah in official capacity.
Candice, I've heard that this is a little controversial. So
this bill is definitely controversial. And frankly, I don't think it should be, but yes, it's one I've been working on. It's one I'm going to keep working on. I think I found a fix, a way to address some of the concerns around it, in that it would be a reported trip expense to the legislature administrative process, as opposed to the lieutenant governor's office who oversees elections. People are concerned that if you are disclosing with the LG's office that a foreign government paid for a trip, that it views it as a campaign contribution, which is in violation of federal law, which is a fair concern. So we're working on shifting it over and creating our own policy around travel expenses. But I do think it's necessary. I do think it's helpful to have accountability and transparency in the process. And that way it doesn't matter. It's not targeting one country. It's just saying in general, if you're going to represent Utah in your official capacity, it'd be great to know about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I first became aware of that when I was, probably sophomore, junior year of my time at UVU, and I went over to Israel with the Anti-Defamation League, and there was also a trip that we ran across that was a bunch of state legislators. So
there you go.
That definitely is something that I think a lot of people don't know happens, but it's very interesting that it does.
Yeah. Well, Utah's punching above our weight when it comes to international politics, international trade. And, we're, for a lot of reasons, leading the country economically. And so I think we need to take ourselves seriously for a lot of the national security concerns and interests in our state. We've got Hill Air Force Base, we've got Dugway Proving Ground, we've got our largest growing sector is aerospace and defense. So I think we just need to put some checks in place across the board to make sure we've tightened up the ship.
Yeah, we've got, I live in Bluffdale, right next to the NSA data, not right next, but, 2 minutes from the NSA data facility. And, there's Northrop Grumman and all those different companies here. And so it's a really key sector here in Utah, especially with all the tech. And so I appreciate that. That's a great kind of forethought there. So kind of switching gears here is another question just on some of your work on domestic violence and
Yeah.
and how you have been approaching that.
This has been an issue. I mean, domestic violence is one of those wicked problems in society, right? That people are always trying to address. But I will tell you, in COVID, this went up exponentially. I mean, this was a huge issue as people were forced to stay home, kids were forced to come home, people and generally women who would have an opportunity to leave, to get help, really had a hard time finding those resources and getting their families to a better place. And I had a terrible case happen in my district where a dad killed his two little boys, and the mom had tried to get a restraining order the week before. And so that's really honestly what propelled me to jump into this issue, because I thought that was a failure. That was a failure on our part. I mean, by our, I mean, the government failed them. She tried to get a restraining order, right? She tried to get help. She tried to reach out for resources, and it just wasn't quick enough to come. And so that's why I started working on this. And one thing I found is that we are so disjointed on this issue, and so many different agencies have a little hand in this. And it's like there are so many hands in the pie that there's really no ownership on it. And the other thing is, we don't even have a great way to report data on domestic violence.
Oh.
So one of the things I'm working on, and I worked on it last session, this is a follow-up to it, but it's a domestic violence task force that would do a couple of things. And one of them is it would establish, it would pull in public safety, it'd pull in the advocates and get everyone around the table for us to be able to address lethality assessments. So right now, officers or victim advocates or court advocates who are, called into these situations, do an assessment as to the risk level that a lot of these women, but some men, are in, and how likely they are to be killed. And if they rate high, right, then you would expedite resources, try and get them out of the situation. But we don't even have a uniform standard across the board. We don't require that all law enforcement agencies use something like that. So anyways, this group is to get together and try and find, how do we get to a place where we're comparing apples to apples? What are the best practices in addressing domestic violence, particularly as it relates to stalking and prevalence of violence in front of a child? Anyways, all those pieces this task force will address. I'm also looking and working with Danielle On, who I'm sure you're familiar with. She's phenomenal. But we have a huge problem right now with our DA turning down cases, right? And I think just today or yesterday, KSL ran a story on it. Oh, look at that. My classroom thinks I'm gone. But they just did a story on it where they had over 100 declination letters that said in the interest of justice, they weren't going to be able to prosecute the perpetrators of the crime. So we're looking at some creative solutions there, looking at, is that related to resources, bandwidth? Why is that the case? But I think domestic violence is something that it is time that our state got a handle on it. We have had historically higher rates of DV. And when you think of how much of it is unreported, it's unacceptable. So anyways, it's an issue I'm really passionate about. What's, to me, domestic violence knows no income level or economic level. It's interesting when I talk to people, they tend to think, well, it's a low income family problem. That's absolutely not the case. And so we need to be getting the resources to our advocates, to our law enforcement, and to our victims that help them get out of these situations.
Yeah, my brother was a prosecutor, actually, not here in Utah, but back in Missouri. And one of the most dangerous parts of the country, actually. So one of the top 10 most violent counties in the country. And it lasted about 3 years as a prosecutor because, there's just high turnover in general. It's a tough issue around the country. And, anybody who can actually tackle and really take care of this issue, it's important. And those are the people who are going to be real leaders on the issue. And I think, from my brother's perspective, he was able to find a better job that paid significantly more pretty quickly and pretty easily.
Yeah.
So, resources are very important, but, maybe some kind of prioritization there that should be taking place as well.
Absolutely. One of the first bills I ran was also dealing with training and post for our officers. We didn't have a consistent domestic violence training. I mean, there are some things that to me, they're just kind of this common sense approach. But I think as we move forward, having this task force and also having a few other tools available will be really helpful, and quite frankly, getting everyone on the same page. We've got a lot of things going on right now, and we need it to be much more streamlined.
Yeah. Well, so Candice, what are some things that that people don't really have their eye on here in the state that you think maybe they should be kind of focusing on a little bit more, that kind of flying under the radar?
I actually do feel like, I appreciate you asking the question on school choice. A lot of conversation has come about and around curriculum in classrooms, has come about teachers, has come about, how students are taught, political classrooms, but really there hasn't been as much of a discussion on school choice as I'd like to see. So that's something we're trying to change and get people talking about it and seeing it as a solution. So I think that's important. I would also say just civic engagement in general. And I have seen a lot of people checking out of the process. Be it what's going on at the national level. They don't feel like their voice is being heard. They've just given up. They're too busy. But now is not the time to be checking out of the process. Now is the time to be checking in. So I would say that's important. I think Utah, I'm working on several different working groups with the speaker to address water concerns in Utah, I think water is becoming and will continue to be a growing issue for our state. We're also looking at, again, the affordability issue in Utah. What can we be doing? What levers can be pulled for us to allow the free market to thrive and get out of the way, but also find creative solutions to our affordability issues. I'll also tell you something really specific, but that I've been working on with my colleagues is DCFS, the Division of Child and Welfare, Child Services, Family Services. We've been working with them quite a bit. We are seeing a lot of issues there. And if we can't take care of our kids in this state, we've got problems. So that's something we're looking at, different things from the caseload, how many cases each caseworker holds, the pay of caseworkers. Until recently, they were making about $14 an hour, which in this economy, with the background they're required and the workload they're required to take on, who would do that, right? We just got them up to $19, $20 an hour, but that's still not enough. I'll also say the foster families who have reached out to me have not felt heard in the system. In fact, the really great ones are checking out. And so anyways, that's one that a lot of people don't talk about, but DCFS is definitely an area I've been working on and will continue working on. I also will argue for an increase in pay for our corrections officers. They just got up to $19 an hour at the prison. And I just recently toured the new prison, and they said, this is a room, which is great. We have, by the way, it's phenomenal facility, but they said, this is a room we have where the officer can come in for a minute to cool off after, being cussed out or having fecal matter thrown at them. And when they said that, I said, how much are we paying them again? And we have we're about 300 officers short right now, right? And that's even after opening it up to 19-year-olds. I mean, I can't imagine why anyone would not want to work in that environment. I mean, I'm being sarcastic, right. But I think there are things we need to be doing. So, and that doesn't mean we have to just only do more government spending. I would be looking at different projects that maybe we could put on hold. Do we really need more higher education buildings built, or can we hold off on a couple other? Anyways, I think just like you have a home budget, you pay your mortgage and your insurance first. You really focus on your family needs first before you go out on the big, less necessary items. I think we need to refocus. And I would say that DCFS and our corrections officers and law enforcement fall into that category of needs.
Well, it sounds like I want to bring it back to a question I asked Tom, is this kind of budgetary squeeze from the income tax earmark and sales taxes. What kind of, how do you think that plays into those kind of issues that you just brought up?
So we I feel like obviously Amendment G helped with a lot of that. Now we're going to keep working on it. And I'm sure there'll be another effort made this session to completely remove the earmark, but we'll see on that, the firewall there, right? But I will also say the way that we do budgeting, where we have a ton of one-time money because we're almost so cautious in how we budget that we're not going to put money that will be there the next year and ongoing, but we keep it all in one time. It drives a lot of different expenses and the way we appropriate money differently. So like if I were told my home budget, you get $10,000 this month, but it's not going to be here every month, you're going to do it on those one-time projects, right? Like you're going to go through the list of things that you need to fix in your house or maybe do savings. But that's similar to when we have a massive one-time surplus, things like personnel, like that I just listed to you, doesn't make it into the possible things to be funded because we're not sure, well, the money won't be there next year, but right, there's an argument that the money won't be there next year. So it drives a really different way of spending. So I do think we'll have another discussion. I think Amendment G helped soften things a little bit, certainly, but we are definitely with the massive one-time surplus we're going to have, and we're going to have an ongoing surplus again as well. Utah has had an ongoing surplus even through COVID. So to me, that means we need to take a hard look at what we're doing. Where do we need to make those improvements made? And then how do we give that money back to people?
Great. Well, Candice, really appreciate you taking some time to chat with me here and really appreciate the work you're doing in the legislature and representing millennials and UVU. So appreciate you joining me and look forward to seeing all the work that you're doing at the legislature.
Hey, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay, everybody. Thanks, Candice, and everybody. Thanks for joining. Bye.